In this video, I'll be going through what's called crashing, which is a part of our project networks. If you have not mastered forward and backward scanning, finding the critical path and the minimum completion time of a project, I suggest that you don't watch this now. You go back and you make sure that you've got a really good grasp of those things before you try and tackle crashing. Crashing appears in every exam, either in multiple choice or short answer. It is quite challenging because they're all quite different, and you have to really read the instructions to make sure that you're doing it properly. However, I have some basic rules that I follow initially, and that sort of helps me get to where I need to go with the question. However, you just got to practice them. So as many exam questions you can do on crashing is going to make you familiar with the process and different types of questions you could come across. All right, so crashing is where something is changed on a project. So your project might be building a house or something like that. Crashing might be, you can hire more builders and they can complete a certain activity quicker. It will probably cost you more money to hire those builders, but it could potentially reduce the time. So there's a payoff to, the cost. But with crashing, they get more complicated because you might have other options that cost more money and this and that. So you have to consider all factors of crashing. All right, so for example, the following diagram shows the activity network to complete a road. The council can pay to have activities C, D, E and F completed in less time than normal. It will cost $350 to reduce the completion time of these activities by 1 week to a maximum reduction in completion time of 2 weeks for each activity. The council will pay to reduce the time to complete the road construction as much time as possible. What is the minimum completion time of the project given these reductions are considered? All right, so how I always go about this is usually, if it isn't a short answer question, they've probably got you to do something in the previous steps, like find the minimum completion time or a slack time for an activity or something like that. So you probably would have done, your forward and backward scan. But I'm going to do that now. I'm not going to take you through it because I've done heaps of videos on that. So I'm just going to pause the video and do that now. Okay, so I've done my forward and backward scan and I've found my critical path, and I've worked out that I can use a highlighter on this thing, so pretty impressed about that. Didn't know I could do that before, so look at me go. All right, so let's have a look at this. So my critical activities are A, B, C, D, and G. I know that they're critical activities because the slack time is 0. What that means is they cannot be delayed at all because they would affect my minimum completion time. All right, so we call these critical activities and they're on the critical path. Now, so I've been instructed that I can reduce C, D, E and F. This is why, I just want to explain why you reduce what's on the critical path by reducing something that's not. Let's have a look at F. So old mate F, whatever that is happening, whatever that activity is to complete the road, whatever it is, I don't know much about roads, so I have no idea. Whatever activity F is, I've been told I can reduce it by 1 week to a maximum of 2. So if I change this to a 2, I need to ask myself, would that have any impact on that? So remember that we're finding this number by finding the maximum way through the network, because that's what our forward scan is doing. We're finding the maximum path through the network. Because F isn't on our critical path, it is not an activity that is on the longest path through the network. So if I reduce F, all the effect that this would have is this would change this 7 to a 5, because I've got 3 plus 2 is 5. And then this option coming in here, instead of it being a 7, it would be a 5. So it's having no effect on this highlighted section that is my critical path. So if I've paid money to reduce this by 2, it's had no impact on this 13. I'm still finishing in 13. All right. So if I have a look at just reducing my critical path first, you can see that that will have an impact. All right, so the first step to my really not detailed instructions here, crush everything on the critical path that you can. Right? So I've been instructed C, D, E, and F can be reduced. So I need to identify what's on the critical path. So I can reduce C, I can reduce D. They're the only two that I can reduce. And I'm going to go as well by my really badly drawn notes. Crush everything on the critical path that you can by as much as you can, just for this first step. So that means I'm going to minus 2 from C, and I'm going to minus 2 from D. Right, if I come back up here, so C will now be done in 2 weeks, and D will now be done in 3 weeks. All right, so I've done this step. My next step is I need to do a forward and backward scan to see if a new critical path is present. So this is where things get a bit messy. It'd be lovely just to have another diagram, but you're never given that on a exam. They might give you a little bit of space to do something, but I find it easier just going over the top. So I'm just going to pause that and put that in. Okay, so trying to do this in a different colour so you can see. Normally, if I was just doing this myself, I'd just squiggle out what I had in the boxes and go over the top, but I've drawn it in green what I've changed. All right, so I've crushed C to 2 and I've crushed D to 3. I've done my forward and backward scan, and this has created a new minimum completion time of this project of 10 weeks, which is awesome. So I've done this step, but now what has happened? Oh, what have I done there? That is not right. That should be a 3. Now what's happened is I've got a new critical path. I'm going to do that in red, which is through here. All right. So my next step is to reduce anything on the new critical path that was not done in step 1. All right, so if I have a look at my activities up here, I did C, I did D. F is still not on my new critical path, but I didn't do E before, so I can reduce E. Now, this is where things get a little bit tricky. Because E is now on the critical path, I have the option to reduce it by 2. Right, let me just find another colour. So if I reduce this by 2, that would become 4. Now, what is particularly of interest, and you get good at this once you practice a lot, is this particular section in here that I'm looking at, this little junction from this vertice to this vertice. And I need to make sure that I'm not over reducing anything because it's costing me money. And unless it's doing something over here, then I don't want to do it. All right, so I have the option, I can reduce E by 2 and make that 4. But let's have a look at what that would do. So I'd have 3 coming into E, I'd add the 4, and this would become 7, right? So this would become 7. I'm going to do that in purple. So that would become 7 in there. And then if I look at, before I go get too carried away, if I was doing a forward and backward scan again, this way coming through here with these already reduced. I've already done that. That's locked in. I'm not changing that. So 2 plus the 3. So coming in, I've got 5 plus the 3 is 8. So if I've made that reduced by 2, coming in this way is 7. Coming in this way is 8. So I've just created the old critical path, right? Which I've already reduced to the maximum. I can't reduce any more. So basically, was there any point of me reducing that by 2? Absolutely not. So what you're doing is, so you on your new critical path, you reduce anything that you haven't done in the first step to make sure you're reducing the path it's on up to, reducing it down to the next highest path. So this is why this is important to note your paths. So for example, this little guy in here, A, B, E, G, is now my new critical path. That's my new critical path, right? And I had the option to reduce E by 2, okay? But by reducing this by 2, this now makes that path through there 8, whereas this path, reducing that by 2, made that 9. So can you see how reducing that E by 2 full weeks was not necessary and a bit of a waste of money? However, if I change that and made it 1 week instead, so reducing it by 1 week, instead of being that 8, it would be 9. So I've made a further reduction to my project. It's now 9, and I haven't paid any excess where it's not affecting my end time, right? So what I've been able to do, given that I could reduce C, D, E, and F, I've been able to reduce this completion time from 13 weeks to 9 weeks. And what I've done to do that is I've reduced C by 2, I've reduced D by 2, and I've reduced E by 1. All right. So this step here, number 3, is a tricky one because you have to look at other options through your network. If you're think that you might miss like the little junctions like what I did, you can at this step you can reduce anything on your new critical path by the maximum that you can, and then do your forward and backward scan, and you'll soon realize that you've made a reduction. Like in this instance, I'd made a reduction by 2, and this had actually gone 8, 9, it only gone down by 1. So what I was getting out of it was not what I put in, all right? So it wasn't worth it. Crushing questions can be tricky when they put in, sometimes they might put in a different, like a pay scale for each activity. And that's when you really have to look at all your options and do a crashing for each option versus pay So they do get quite complicated. And I think that's about it. They do, looking at mine, it's really messy. If colours work for you, use colours if that's easier. I do recommend writing down your pass through the network. The reason why I never touched F, because it was nowhere near in becoming ever close to like ADON, like it was so much lower, so it was never going to be in the ballpark. That's a good way of reducing your time doing these as well. But yeah, just don't put them off just because you think they're hard. Give them a go. Practice makes perfect. Get out your exam booklet and get into some crushing questions. They're actually pretty fun once you get your head around it. Hopefully this has helped, and yeah, good luck with this part of the exercise.